Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching, so YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now, let's begin. I'm going to tell you something I've been trying to rationalize for 6 months now, and I still can't make sense of it. I'm a handyman, been doing it for about 8 years. I take whatever jobs come my way, mostly residential stuff. But last April I got hired by the County Parks Department to refresh one of their old picnic pavilions out near Kettle Lake. It was a straightforward gig: repaint the interior, patch some cracks, replace a few light fixtures. The pavilion itself was built in the 30s, all stone and concrete, mainly rented out for family reunions and company picnics. I had the place to myself for a full week since they'd blocked off reservations during the work. I showed up on a Monday morning with my tools and paint, and the first thing I noticed when I walked in was the smell. It wasn't strong, just noticeable, like old leather mixed with something sharp, almost metallic, ozone maybe, like right before a thunderstorm. I figured it was just the pavilion being closed up all winter, so I propped the doors open and got to work. The smell didn't really fade, though. Even with the cross breeze going, it hung in the air, concentrated near the back corner where the main support wall met the floor. I'm not the type to get distracted by weird smells. I've worked in crawl spaces and old barns, but this one kept pulling my attention. By the end of that first day, I'd painted most of the ceiling and was down on my knees patching hairline cracks in the concrete foundation when I found the one in that back corner. It was narrow, maybe a 1/4 inch wide, running horizontal about 6 inches above the floor. I was scraping it out to prep it for sealant when my putty knife went in deeper than it should have. I stopped and looked closer. The crack wasn't just a surface fracture. It opened into something. I grabbed my flashlight and angled it in, and what I saw made me pause. There was a cavity back there, not a natural void or a gap from settling. This was smooth, deliberate. It ran horizontally into the wall, maybe 8 or 9 inches deep before the light just stopped hitting anything. I tapped the concrete next to it with the handle of my knife and it sounded solid. Tapped the crack itself and it echoed faintly, like there was empty space behind it. I know what you're thinking. Old buildings have weird construction quirks all the time. That's what I told myself. Maybe they'd run conduit through there decades ago and sealed it over. Maybe it was a drainage feature that never got finished. But the smell was stronger there, right at the opening, and when I leaned in close, I swear I felt air moving. Not a draft from outside. This was coming from inside the wall, like something was breathing it out. I should have just sealed it and moved on, but I sat there for a minute, shining my light into that gap, trying to see further back. The walls of the cavity were too smooth, not rough like broken concrete or chiseled stone. Smooth, like they'd been poured or molded. And the angle was wrong. It didn't follow the natural lines of the foundation. It cut across them. I finally got up and mixed a batch of sealant, filled the crack and smoothed it over. By then it was getting dark outside, so I cleaned up my tools, checked that the paint cans were sealed, and locked up. I didn't think much of it on the drive home, but that night I kept seeing that smooth cavity in my head, the way the light just disappeared into it. The next morning when I came back, the smell was gone. I noticed it immediately when I walked in. The air was just normal, a little stale maybe, but no trace of that leather and ozone odor. I figured I'd finally aired the place out, so I went to check my work from the day before. The ceiling paint had dried clean. The cracks I'd patched looked fine. And the one in the back corner, the one with the cavity, was perfectly sealed. Too perfectly. The sealant I'd applied was the standard gray concrete patch, the kind that takes at least 12 hours to fully cure and always leaves a slightly rough texture. What I was looking at was smooth, flush with the wall, and a shade lighter than what I'd used. I crouched down and ran my hand over it. It was cold, even though the pavilion had warmed up in the morning sun. And it was hard, Not cured concrete hard, but something denser. I pressed my thumb against it and couldn't leave a mark. I stood up and checked the rest of my work. Everything else looked exactly like I'd left it. Same tools in the same spots, same paint trays with the same dried edges. But that one patch had been redone. I spent the rest of that day trying to focus on painting the walls, but I kept glancing back at that corner. At lunchtime, I walked the perimeter outside, looking for any sign someone had been there overnight. Tire tracks, footprints, anything. The gravel parking lot was empty except for my truck. No other vehicles had been there since I'd left. Here's the thing. I'm not the type to believe in weird stuff. I don't watch ghost shows or read creepy stories online. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I decided to document what I was seeing. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the sealed crack. Then I checked my photos from the day before, the ones I'd taken to log my progress for the county. I scrolled to the shot I'd taken of that back corner before I'd started patching. The crack wasn't in the photo. I mean, the wall was there, the same section of foundation, but the surface was smooth. No crack, no gap. I checked the metadata. It was definitely from the day before, same timestamp as the other progress photos. But the crack I'd spent 20 minutes sealing wasn't visible. I went back to the corner and crouched down again, running my fingers over the patch. My hand stopped on something small and metallic, barely protruding from the surface. I worked it loose with my knife. It took some effort, like it was set deep, and when it came free, I almost dropped it. It was a piece of my house key, not a copy, not something similar. My actual key, or part of it. I recognized the cut pattern on the teeth, the specific wear on the edge from where I'd filed it down last year when it started sticking in my lock. It was sheared off clean, just the tip, maybe a 1/4 inch long. I had my keys in my pocket. I pulled them out and checked. My house key was intact, no damage, no missing piece. I held the fragment next to it anyway, and the cuts matched perfectly. Same key, same marks, but mine was whole. My hand started shaking then, not from fear exactly, but from the wrongness of it. I put the fragment in my pocket and stood up, and that's when I noticed the smell was back. Faint, but definitely there. Old leather and ozone, coming from the sealed crack. I didn't finish the job. I packed up my tools, told the county I'd had a family emergency and haven't been back. They paid me for the 2 days and hired someone else to complete it. I still have that key fragment in a drawer at home. Sometimes I take it out and hold it next to my key just to make sure I didn't imagine the match. The thing I can't stop thinking about isn't the cavity or the smell or even the impossible patch job. It's the air I felt moving through that crack, the way it came from inside the wall, steady and rhythmic, like something back there was breathing. And the fact that when I sealed it, something sealed it again, better than I could have, and left me a piece of myself I shouldn't have lost. I don't know what was in that wall, but whatever it was, it knew I'd been there, and it wanted me to know it could reach me. I'm a park ranger, 44 years old, been with the Wildlife Division for 16 years now. I'm telling you this because what I'm about to describe isn't something I would have believed coming from someone else. Last September, we got reports of cougar activity in the Cascade Ridge area. Nothing unusual, just hikers spotting tracks, hearing calls at night. Standard protocol meant setting up trail cameras to document movement patterns, maybe get a population estimate. I've done this dozens of times. You hike out to remote areas, mount cameras on trees about chest height, angle them toward game trails, and wait. The cameras are motion activated. When something moves past, they trigger and record for 30 seconds. I set up 6 cameras over a 2-day period, all along a 15-mile stretch of backcountry where the sightings had been concentrated. These weren't maintained trails, just deer paths and dry creek beds cutting through dense Douglas fir. The kind of terrain where you don't expect to see people because there's no reason for people to be there. No scenic overlooks, no water features, just wilderness. I checked the cameras 2 weeks later. That's the usual interval. Enough time to capture behavioral patterns without disturbing the area too frequently. The first 4 cameras showed exactly what I expected. Deer mostly, a black bear, raccoons. One camera caught a bobcat, which was actually exciting because we don't see them often in that elevation. The 5th camera was different. The first anomaly clip was time-stamped 3:07 in the morning, dated September 19th. The footage showed a woman walking directly toward the camera on what wasn't even really a path, just a gap between trees. She was elderly, maybe late 60s or early 70s, wearing street clothes. Dark slacks, a cardigan. Regular walking shoes, not hiking boots. Her hair was short and gray, and she moved at a steady pace. Not fast, but not slow either. She didn't look at the camera, didn't pause, just walked through the frame in about 8 seconds and disappeared into the darkness beyond the infrared range. I assume she was a lost hiker. It happens. People underestimate distances, take wrong turns, end up miles from where they intended. But the timestamp bothered me. 3:07 in the morning is a strange time to be walking, even if you're lost. And her clothes were wrong. Nobody hikes in slacks and a cardigan. I kept scrolling through the footage. The next clip from that camera was dated September 20th, 3:07 in the morning. Same woman, same clothes, same steady pace, same direction. She walked through the frame in almost exactly the same spot, like she was following an invisible line only she could see. September 21st, 3:07 in the morning. Same thing. September 22nd, September 23rd. Every single day she appeared at precisely 3:07 in the morning, walking the same route. I sat in my truck going through 2 weeks of footage, and she was there every single night. 14 consecutive appearances, all at 3:07 in the morning, always alone, always wearing the same outfit. The camera captured her from the same angle each time because she walked the exact same path. Not approximately the same, but identical, like she was tracing the same line over and over. Here's what made my hands start shaking as I watched. During that 2-week period, we'd had 3 significant rainstorms. I'd hiked out in the aftermath of one of them, slogging through mud, getting drenched by water still dripping from branches. In the footage from those nights, the ground was visibly wet. You could see the sheen of moisture on leaves in the infrared, but she was completely dry. Her hair wasn't wet. Her clothes weren't soaked or even damp looking. She just walked through like the rain didn't exist. I reported it to my supervisor, showed him the footage. He watched maybe 5 clips before he said what I'd already been thinking. We needed to check missing person reports, see if anyone matching her description had been reported lost in the area. But there was nothing. No reports from that region in the past 6 months. No elderly women. Nobody. We discussed searching for her, but where do you even start? The forest in that area covers hundreds of square miles. She could be anywhere during the day. The only thing we knew for certain was that she'd be at that specific spot at 3:07 in the morning, and my supervisor wasn't about to authorize a nighttime search operation based on trail camera footage. His exact words were, "She's obviously alive and mobile. If she wanted help, she'd signal the camera or leave some kind of marker." I moved one of the other cameras, repositioned it about a 1/4 mile down the path she seemed to be following. I wanted to see if she continued in that direction or if she looped back somehow. I checked it a week later. She appeared on that camera too, same time, 3:07 in the morning. But here's what changed. She was walking the opposite direction, not back toward the original camera, but continuing on the same path as if the path was circular, a loop. I tried to map it in my head. If she was walking a continuous loop and passing fixed points at exactly 3:07 in the morning every night, that meant she was maintaining a precise pace over unknown terrain in complete darkness. No flashlight, I would have seen it in the footage. No headlamp, just walking. The loop theory made me realize something else. I calculated roughly how long it would take to walk between the two camera points at her pace. About 4 hours. If she passed the first camera at 3:07 in the morning and was walking a loop, she'd complete it and pass the same camera again around 7 o'clock in the morning. I checked. There was no footage of her returning. She passed once per night at 3:07 in the morning, and then she was gone until the next night at the exact same time. That's when I started thinking about migration patterns, about how animals follow routes with precision that seems almost mechanical. Salmon returning to spawn, birds flying thousands of miles to the same nesting sites, deer using the same trails for generations, but those are instincts, biological imperatives. This was a person. I went back out there in late October. I wanted to see the area in daylight, try to understand what she might be doing. The path she followed wasn't a path at all, just a route through the forest that happened to be relatively clear of undergrowth. There were no signs of habitation, no campsite, no shelter, nothing. I walked what I estimated to be her route for about 2 miles before I had to turn back. It was just forest. Dense, unremarkable forest. I thought about leaving a note on the camera, something like, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" But that felt intrusive somehow, and also pointless. She never looked at the camera. It was as if she couldn't see it, or didn't care. The footage continued through November, every single night at 3:07 in the morning. I stopped checking it regularly. What was the point? She was going to be there, doing the same thing, and I had no explanation. My supervisor stopped asking about it. It became this strange, filed-away thing that nobody wanted to discuss because discussing it meant acknowledging how deeply wrong it was. December brought snow, heavy snow, the kind that makes backcountry travel dangerous and shuts down most of the park to recreational access. I assumed the footage would stop. Nobody could maintain that kind of routine in those conditions. She was still there, walking through 6 inches of fresh snow at 3:07 in the morning. I could see her breath in the cold air, but she wore the same cardigan, same slacks, no winter coat, no gloves. The snow wasn't even disturbed behind her in the frame. By the time the camera's 30-second recording ended, her footprints had already started filling in with fresh snowfall. I haven't checked the cameras in 3 weeks. They're still out there. She's probably still walking. What keeps me awake now isn't fear exactly, it's the wrongness of it. The human mind isn't built for that kind of regularity. We're not supposed to be that consistent. We get tired, we get sick, we make mistakes, we change. But she doesn't change. She just walks every night at 3:07 in the morning, following a route that doesn't go anywhere, wearing clothes that should have rotted off her body by now. I keep thinking about those cameras, still recording, still capturing her every single night. I'm an urban planner, early 30s, and my job is about as boring as it sounds. Zoning maps, environmental surveys, public comment sessions. I'm a pretty rational person, for context. I deal in data, not ghost stories. Last month, the city hired me to assess a proposed expansion of Ridgeway Park into adjacent private land. About 40 acres of dense forest that hadn't been surveyed in decades. The landowner had finally agreed to sell, and my job was to document the existing conditions. Tree density, erosion patterns, wildlife corridors, standard stuff. I borrowed a high-resolution mapping drone from a colleague because the canopy was too thick for a proper ground survey. The plan was simple: fly a grid pattern, generate a topographic overlay, file my report. The first 2 days were uneventful. Miles of unbroken forest, the kind of old-growth hardwood you don't see much anymore in our region. Oak, hickory, some tulip poplar. The drone footage came back clean. Healthy canopy, no signs of blight or invasive species. I was actually pleased. It would make a beautiful addition to the park system. On the third pass, I was reviewing footage from a section about 2 miles in when I noticed something off in the imagery, a color shift in the canopy. I zoomed in and the leaves looked normal, but the trunks looked wrong. I tagged the coordinates and flew the drone back for a closer look, dropping it down below the canopy to get a better angle. That's when I saw it. A massive clearing, maybe 300 yards across, where every single tree had been stripped of bark in a perfect horizontal band. Not randomly, not sporadically, every tree. The stripped section ran about 6 feet off the ground, and the precision was what got me first. The edges were so clean they looked machined, but there were no tool marks, no saw teeth, no axe blade scars, just deep, polished grooves carved into the bare wood, running horizontally around each trunk like something had wrapped itself around them and scraped the bark away. The trees were still alive. That was the part that made my stomach drop. The leaves above were green and full. These trees had been damaged recently, weeks maybe, and they were surviving, but the exposed wood had this sick, glistening quality, like exposed muscle. I landed the drone and pulled up the file on my laptop. I went through the footage 3 times, counting. 47 trees in that clearing, every single one marked at exactly the same height. The grooves were deep, too, at least an inch into the wood in some places, spiraling around the trunks in smooth, deliberate curves. I know what you're thinking. Machinery, right? Some logging company doing prep work. But there were no access roads within 5 miles of that section. No tire tracks. No equipment scars in the undergrowth. And the grooves didn't match any tool I'd ever seen. They were too organic, too fluid. I called my supervisor and sent her the footage. She went quiet for a long time after I explained what I was seeing. Then she said, "Owen, don't go out there in person. Just file the report with what you have." But I couldn't. I needed to see it myself. I needed to understand the scale of it because the drone footage didn't convey how wrong it felt. The next morning, I drove out to the access point and hiked in with a GPS unit and a handheld camera. It took me almost 2 hours to reach the coordinates. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no insects, just wind moving through the canopy, and even that sounded muted. The forest around the clearing was dense and healthy, but the moment I crossed into that stripped section, the air felt different, heavier. The trees up close were worse than the footage suggested. The grooves weren't random scratches, they were patterns. Deliberate, interlocking curves that wrapped around each trunk with a precision that made my skin crawl. I reached out and touched one of the stripped sections. The wood was smooth, polished, cold, even in the late morning sun. I started taking measurements. The height was exact, 6 feet, 2 inches on every tree. The width of the stripped band varied slightly, between 8 and 12 inches, but the placement was identical. Whatever did this had moved through the forest systematically, marking each tree with the same methodical care. Then I found the fir. It was caught in one of the grooves near the base of a large oak, coarse, dark gray, almost black in the shadows. I pulled a sample and held it up to the light. The individual strands were thick, thicker than any animal fur I'd ever seen, closer to wire than hair. I bagged it and kept moving. That's when I realized the clearing wasn't circular. It was a path. The marked trees formed a corridor through the forest, wide enough for something massive to move through without disturbing the undergrowth on either side. I followed it for maybe 200 yards, and the markings continued. Every tree, same height, same deliberate grooves. At the end of the corridor, the pattern stopped, just ended. The last tree was marked like the others, but beyond it, the forest was untouched. No trail, no disturbed ground. Whatever made this had either stopped here or simply vanished into the dense woods beyond. I checked the ground for prints. Nothing. The forest floor was thick with leaf litter, but there were no depressions, no weight marks. Something large enough to strip bark off 47 trees at 6 feet high should have left a trench in the ground. But there was nothing. I tried to rationalize it on the hike back. Maybe a piece of heavy equipment had been airlifted in for some reason. Maybe it was an art installation, some guerrilla environmental statement. But none of that explained the grooves. None of that explained the precision. And nothing explained why there was no evidence of human presence anywhere in that section of forest. I submitted my report with the footage and the fur sample. I recommended the expansion be delayed pending further investigation. The city's wildlife management team went out a week later with their own equipment. They found the clearing exactly where I said it would be. But here's the thing. They measured the height of the stripped bark at 6 feet, 8 inches, not 6'2". I argued with them. I showed them my notes, my photos. They said I must have made an error. But I didn't. I'm certain of that. Which means whatever made those marks came back while I was gone and adjusted its work, raised the pattern 6 inches higher on every single tree. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if it was correcting a mistake or if it's still out there, still marking, still claiming that section of forest with a precision that suggests it knows exactly what it's doing. The expansion was approved last week. They're breaking ground next month. I asked my supervisor if anyone would be monitoring the site during construction. She said there was no budget for it. I haven't been back. I won't be going back. I'm a delivery driver, self-employed, mostly rural logistics. I take the jobs other companies won't touch, the ones that require driving 3 hours into nowhere to drop off propane tanks or medical supplies at ranger stations. It's decent money and I like the solitude. I'm not the type who gets rattled easily. 42 years old, seen plenty of weird stuff on back roads at night. Deer with half their faces missing from disease. Abandoned cars that have been stripped for parts. Once found a whole campsite just left behind, food still on the table. This was different. I was heading to a fire lookout station about 60 miles north of the main highway. Single-lane Forest Service road. No cell signal for the last 40 minutes of the drive. It was around 11 at night. I'd left light because the ranger I was delivering to worked nights and specifically asked me to come after dark so he'd be awake to help unload. About 2 miles from the station, my headlights caught something reflective on a tree trunk. Not animal eyes. Wrong color, wrong height. I slowed down. There was a trail camera strapped to a pine tree about 7 feet up, one of those expensive models with the cellular uplink and the black metal housing. Here's the thing. I've seen hundreds of trail cams. Hunters use them, researchers use them, even the Forest Service uses them. They're always pointed at the trail or at a game path or at eye level where you'd catch a person walking. This one was angled straight up at the sky. I stopped the truck. Told myself it was probably just mounted wrong, maybe fell and got repositioned by someone who didn't know what they were doing. But it was strapped on tight, deliberate. New straps, no weathering, and the angle was too specific. 45 degrees, pointed up through the canopy. I got out, I don't know why. Curiosity maybe, or just the wrongness of it. The camera had an SD card slot on the side, one of those quick release types. I popped it out. Again, I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. Walked back to my truck. I keep a laptop in the cab for routing software. Plugged the card in. 83 photos. All taken over the past 9 days, according to the timestamps. I opened the first one. It was a human eye, just an eye. Extreme close-up, maybe 2 inches from the lens. The iris was brown, the pupil blown wide like someone in complete darkness. But the detail was incredible. I could see individual blood vessels in the sclera, the texture of the iris, even the faint reflection of the camera's infrared sensor in the pupil surface. The photo was taken at 2:47 in the morning. I opened the next one, different eye, blue this time, same extreme close-up, same level of detail, taken at 1:15 in the morning, 3 days prior. I went through all 83. Every single one was an eye. Different eyes, different colors, different shapes, some with visible damage like burst blood vessels or scratches on the cornea, all photographed in total darkness with that infrared flash, all taken between midnight and 4 in the morning. My hands were shaking by the time I got to the last photo. I don't know if it was the cold or something else, but I had to set the laptop down on the passenger seat. None of the eyes were looking at the camera. That's what made it worse. They were all unfocused, staring at nothing, like the people were unconscious, or worse. I thought about the angle of the camera, pointed at the sky, and then I thought about how you'd get a photo like that, a close-up of someone's eye in the middle of the night in the middle of the woods. You'd have to be standing over them. You'd have to bring the camera down to their face while they were lying on the ground. The ranger station was still 2 miles ahead. I looked at the road, then back at the tree with the camera still strapped to it. I put the SD card in my pocket. Don't ask me why. Maybe I thought it was evidence. Maybe I just didn't want to leave it there. I drove the rest of the way to the station doing maybe 15 miles an hour, watching the trees on both sides. The ranger, guy named Carl, mid-50s, been doing this for 20 years, met me outside, helped me unload the supplies without much conversation. I almost asked him about the camera. Almost. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was, "You ever have people go missing on this road?" He stopped, holding a box of canned goods. "Why? Just wondering." He looked at me for a long moment. "Sometimes. Hikers, mostly. Get turned around, run out of water. Usually find them within a day or two." He paused. "Had a guy last month we never found. Left his car at the trailhead, never came back." I didn't ask anything else. On the drive back, I stopped where the camera was, or where it should have been. The tree was empty, fresh marks on the bark where the straps had been, but the camera was gone. I'd been at the ranger station maybe 20 minutes. I still have the SD card. I've looked at the photos maybe a dozen times trying to find something I missed. Tried reverse image searching a few, but nothing came up. I thought about going to the police, but what would I even say? I found a camera in the woods with weird photos on it, and now it's gone. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. The level of detail in those photos required a macro lens, professional equipment, and the metadata showed they were all taken with the same camera, same settings. Someone went back to that spot over and over, 9 different nights, and took those pictures. I don't do night deliveries on that route anymore. Told my clients I've got a scheduling conflict. They can find someone else. The SD card is in my glove box. I keep thinking I should destroy it, but I haven't. Sometimes when I'm driving during the day, regular routes, normal deliveries, I catch myself checking my rearview mirror more than I should, not looking for cars, looking for something else. I don't even know what.